Hi there, I'm Örjan Gill from playalongmusic.com. It's the 17th December in 2009. We're here in Stockholm, Sweden. The snow is falling outside and we have Guthrie Govan in town. How are you?
All right. It's been warmer. Yeah. This is not the warmest place I've been in my life, but it's all good. It's fresh, invigorating kind of cold. So.
I've just witnessed a very good masterclass here at Fryshuset, and later on you're going to do a concert. Yeah. Can I please ask you some of the questions, some of the topics you were talking about earlier, especially one thing about exploring your sound, and you didn't mean pedals and amplifiers, and can you say something about that?
Yeah, no, I think a lot of a player's tone is self-contained. And if you look at any of the really great players with wonderful tones, you look at Jeff Beck, you know you could give him any cheap guitar and some horrible transistor practice amp. He'll play one note and you'll know it's Jeff Beck. So, I mean, nice gear is always a bonus. Life is more pleasurable when you've got the amp of your dreams and the guitar of your dreams, but nice gear is never a substitute for just looking at all the different ways you can hit the string and trying to get your personality to come through the instrument just by playing properly. I like to talk about that stuff at clinics because I meet so many people who think that by spending money they can make a problem go away, whereas in fact you have to spend time to make a problem go away, certainly as far as tone is concerned. So earlier today, as you know, but as your noble viewers don't know yet, I was talking about the way you can hit the string at in different areas along its length. So if you play nearer the saddle, you get more of a gretchy twang, and if you move towards the fretboard, you slowly become more warm. And George Benson, if you play exactly 12 frets above the note you're playing with your fretting hand, you'll get this weird hollow kind of clarinet sound. Or if you play right up next to the fret, you get this twangy sort of Far Eastern sound. And then I think we touched on different angles you can have with your pick, and how if you slice the string with the edge of the pick, you get more of a biting, single coil, kind of abrasive sound. And if you want to make it a bit fatter and warmer, you flatten the pick out, so you're using the whole side of the pick to strike the string. And dynamics, of course, are another thing. Even if a player's got a really high gain amp and the volume of the note coming through the amp is the same, regardless of the dynamics, the tone will still be affected. And I always like to reference some of the really cool rock players with this biting, aggressive sound, like Angus Young and Gary Moore, and that's always the sound of someone hitting the guitar hard. And you just get a different kind of attack. You sound a lot more sincere as an angry man of rock, I think, if you really punish the string. So, yeah, I rambled about that stuff earlier today for what seemed like hours, and people were still there at the end of it, so hopefully they believed me.
Yeah, it was really... you're using a thick pick.
Yeah.
You prefer that?
Yeah, I think thick pick gives you more versatility. I think you can play a soft note with a thick pick more easily than you can play a huge fat note with a thin pick. Also, I think there's a bit of an analogy with writing. And if you want to play with any degree of accuracy, what you're doing is small, controlled movements, and it's equivalent to trying to write something with a pencil that's very small but still legible. You don't want a rubber pencil. You want a pencil that's rigid and does what it's told. So I guess that's basically why I like thick picks.
Rising. Now rising. Expected to rock all. Expected to rock.
You mentioned some great guitar players you were listening to when growing up and practicing, like Clapton, with the early stuff with Cream, and Jimi Hendrix, of course, and I think, and you can hear their sound really.
Cool. I mean, I've learned different things from different players over the years, and I think one of the key points is where you are in your own playing when you hear someone else, and the kind of impact that a famous player will have on you as you're growing yourself. it depends on what kind of player you are already. So I learned certain things from Chuck Berry about just playing simple, basic rhythm guitar, 1-4-5 progressions, but making it feel good and sound good. George Harrison got me into some of the more interesting chords before I heard Joe Pass, and obviously that was a terrifying moment, but the Beatles stuff is a great source of chordal ideas for a guitar player who's just been raised on the rock and roll stuff, particularly like Abbey Road and things like that. There's all sorts of fantastic chords on there. But in terms of lead playing, it was Cream era Clapton for me, Jimi Hendrix to some extent, Sal Clemenson from the Alex Harvey Band. That's my strange influence that not everyone has. But for me, he played the part in my development that maybe Jimmy Page would have played in a normal person's development. I loved Sal's sharp, biting tone. The Hendrix thing for me, just because of when I heard him, probably the most impact Hendrix had on me was in terms of rhythm playing and lead playing and how you can blur that boundary between the two, and how he could just launch into this funky rhythm guitar workout in the middle of a solo, as you hear in All Along the Watchtower, or how he could be playing simple chord progression like Little Wing, and it's an organic melodic thing, and it just drifts from one chord into the other. And I found that fascinating. That encouraged me to just look at the fretboard in a different way and figure out just how many different things can I do when I'm playing in E. If I'd heard Jimmy at another point in my life, maybe I would have been more taken by the whammy bar, histrionics and the feedback and the screaming notes, where the chordal thing was what blew my mind the most back then.
Yes, so to get a good tone and get your own tone, your own personality tone, is the way you have done it, is to listen to people, of course, you like, and then develop your own style.
Yeah, I think there's that theory, if you steal from one person, it's plagiarism. If you steal from lots of people, it's research, which I think is meant to be a more positive thing. I've always tried to absorb something from everything that I've heard and enjoyed. And I think in the end, if you stay true to the guitar you hear in your head, in the end you keep the parts of what you've stolen which are helpful for you to achieve your own thing. So I'm sure there are little snippets of all sorts of different players in what I do, but I'm never consciously trying to mimic any one of them. It's just like learning new words. It doesn't matter where you learn it from, it's how you use it and where you put it. So yes, my style is a big ugly mess of everything I've ever heard, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
It's lovely. You have a nice thing of thinking about scales. I think so. Can you please tell us something about that?
Okay, the way I think about scales is something I've always taken for granted because I learned so much as an ear player, and it's always been second nature to me that you should hear something either on record or in your head, and then you try and make the guitar make that sound that you're hearing. But I see so many more technically minded, studious kind of guitar players now who sort of come to me for help for one reason or another, and they always start by saying, what scales do I need to know? What scale did you use in that solo? What scales sound good for jazz? And I think maybe as a breed we've been poisoned by scales over the years, because they're so easy to teach and they're easy to practice, and it's easy to measure your success. How many scales do you know now? How many keys can you play them in? How fast can you fire up the metronome and play the scale and get everything right? But they actually don't have that much to do with music. And I try to think more in terms of, at any point in a piece of music there is some harmony behind you, there is a chord, and you've got this hierarchy of notes. There's the root note, there's the other notes that are in the chord just below the root note in the scheme of importance. And then you can go down and maybe look at the other notes which are in an appropriate mode or scale but aren't in the chord. They're the notes that give you flavouring without necessarily sounding out. And then underneath that you've got the forbidden notes, you've got the chromatic notes that shouldn't work but will work if you put them in the right order. So I like to think, within reason, you can play any one of the 12 notes at any moment, so long as you've got a good idea what you're going to do next. And the key to that is surely learning the sound of every note, not just the location of every note on the neck, which means counterintuitively you have to slow things down.
Life is good. All right, this next one is called Wonderful Slippery Thing. Goes like this.
So to summarise all of my ramblings, I think it's dangerous to become too obsessed with scales, because you are what you practice, and if you just practice running up and down scales, then when you try and make music, that's what's going to come out of your amp. And I don't think it sounds that good, which is why anyone who relies too heavily on scales to make music and improvise tends to speed up, because they're hiding the fact that you have to hide the fact that there's no real melodic content in just going up and down every possible right note. Really try and emphasise learning the different character of each note within a scale, and then you can use them responsibly, and hopefully the man in the street wants to hear you play.
One thing that you said, why start at the bottom of the scale or on top of the scale? Start in the middle.
Yeah, I have nothing to add. I'm a believer in that. If you learn any shape, why not find the root note in the middle, and then you've got twice as many options. If you play the lowest note in the scale, that's almost telling you what you have to do next. And it's a common problem I see when I watch some student who's learned a new scale, and I say, let's have a jam, let's improvise with this scale. That's what they're going to do. First finger on the lowest string. And then the scale tells them what the next 10 notes of their solo will be. So, yeah, it's always good to visualise chord shapes within any scale that you know, and to know where the root notes are, and just be able to navigate both ways, I think.
We talked about the right hand, exploring that, and also how about the left hand? Can you tell me something? You said some interesting stuff about using the vibrato in different...
Okay, yeah, I have one thing I always like to talk about at clinics and stuff. Rock guitar has a unique style of vibrato. It's not like anything else in music. If you look at any other instrument, you look at an opera singer or a violinist or anything like that, their vibrato goes above and below the pitch of the note. And when we do it, I guess because the side-to-side classical nylon string vibrato doesn't work so well on the electric, we tend to do that rubbing the string against the fret, bending it sharp, letting it back, bending it sharp, letting it back. And you get this weird vibrato where the average pitch of the note is above the intended pitch of the note. An opera singer can go above it and below it, so the mean pitch of the note is where it should be. And I think the way we do it, rock guitar players, where it's always a little sharper, that gives us a unique kind of sound. For some things it's good, but in other respects it's limiting. So I quite like the idea that you can maybe approach a note from a fret below or 2 frets below and kind of pre-bend up. And then when you add vibrato, you have a bit of leeway. You can go flat or sharp. And the pitching of the note is a little more centred, and it sounds sweeter, I think, as a result. It doesn't have that jagged, aggressive aspect that the typical rock vibrato always has. To
sum it up, or just to end this interview, you're going to perform later on, so I know you have to leave, but do you have some other tips for young people who would like to become a good guitar player like you? Something else that you... Well,
don't become a good guitar player like me, become a good guitar player like you. All that stuff about borrowing little morsels of vocabulary from other players, that's a means to an end, but I think it's important to find your own voice. I know one of my favourite Swedes, Mr. Mattias Eklund, his way of saying this is grow your own moustache. So anything like that, you know, the ultimate goal has to be find your own thing and express that. And you go through this process of imitation and musical theft, if you like, as a way of getting to be the player that you need to be. I would also say, this is possibly even more important, don't just sit there in your bedroom with a metronome posting videos of yourself playing fast on YouTube, because it's not real music. You want to be writing songs, you want to be playing with people and to people. I think it's really important to get that humbling sense of being part of something bigger than the guitar itself. You're part of a band, you're part of a team of people trying to make a nice sound. And you learn so much more about groove and dynamics and stuff like that. Really, that's what makes you employable. If you've got a good tone and you can play in time, if you can play simple stuff but put every note in exactly the right place relative to where the pulse of the music is, that will get you gigs, that will make people happy. If you can sweep pick like a demon and you can't do little chordal stabs on beat 2 and beat 4, no one wants to give you a gig. So I think that's an interesting way of looking at things. Hopefully people out there agree that there's some sense in my ramblings.
Yeah, I'm sure. Thanks a lot for taking your time, and good luck tonight, and Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
And the same to you. Yo ho ho.